The screen lit up before the coffee brewed. One headline, then three, then a synchronized ambush from every push alert Caroline Levit had trained herself to ignore. Breaking Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett files. $80 million lawsuit against White House Press Secretary Caroline Levit for defamation and civil rights violations. Her thumb froze halfway to the dismiss button, like a soldier flinching after the first bullet cracks the air. Then the second alert vibrated harder. The third came with that brutal little banner preview, and the fourth made the floor under her confidence tilt. She didn't move. Not even when the kettle clicked itself off. Not when a staffer's text popped up, "Call me ASAP," or when a cable news app splashed the red live badge like sirens. Someone somewhere had hit the detonator, and the blast wave arrived through glass and pixels, turning that quiet Tuesday morning into a war zone. Just 3 weeks earlier, she'd been invincible. The Dairo demolition had rocketed her from talented rookie to untouchable phenomenon. Clips of her carving up a Hollywood heavyweight played on loop across conservative feeds and hate watch threads alike. She didn't just win that segment. She seized it, branded it, sold it back to her base like merch. Donors smiled. Gatekeepers nodded. Even enemies respected the footwork. That was then. This was now. An $80 million missile with her name stamped on the warhead, arcing across the Potomac with terminal precision. She skimmed the duplicate headlines, looking for flaws in typography, a mismatch in timestamp, any micro-signal that said, "Internet error." There wasn't one. The story had cohesion and momentum. It didn't look like rumor. It looked like gravity. Her phone thrummed again. Another staffer. Ignore the noise. We'll handle it. Another. Do not tweet. A third, the pragmatic one. Have you called counsel? She could picture their faces in the West Wing. Some rehearsing calm, some already drafting distances. The irony tasted metallic. She was the message professional who suddenly couldn't message herself out of a paper bag. She exhaled once, deep and slow, then went hunting for the catch. Lawsuits were theater. She knew that. Big numbers were stage lighting. She knew that too. But this wasn't a number hung for show. This was a sum chosen for symbolism, devastation made measurable. It wasn't a demand. It was a verdict foretold, a headline that did its own commentary, career-killing magnitude. She opened the first article. Before the third paragraph, she found the phrase "no press secretary ever wants to read" attached to their name. Pattern of statements. The next line tightened the vice. From the White House podium. She clicked back, tried a different outlet. Same framing, same phrasing, like the networks had practiced in a clandestine chorus line. The narrative spine had already set. Not a slip, not a stray quip, not heat of battle banter. A pattern. 2 more vibrations. This time the apps she'd mentally muted after Dairo, the ones that swarmed when they smelled blood instead of victory. Commentators who'd praised her merciless precision now typed like coroners. A legal analyst's quote snagged her eye. When the podium becomes a weapon, the law becomes armor. She almost laughed. The line was too polished, too tweet-ready. But it worked. And the problem with a weaponized podium is that it leaves fingerprints. Microphones don't forget. She moved, finally, through the tiny apartment like a boxer after the bell. Kettle, cup, black coffee. She didn't taste it. Her reflection in the microwave door looked like a composite sketch. Still, sharp, slightly unreal. She had to get to the building. She had to get to the room. She had to keep control of the hours before they were taken from her. That's what you do when the oxygen gets thin. You pretend there's more air. You inhale anyway. The first call connected on the second ring. "Tell me it's flimsy," she said. No greeting. No chit-chat. Professionals don't waste seconds when the ceiling's cracking. "It's not flimsy," counsel said, choosing each syllable like glassware. "We need everything you've said on the record in the last month. All of it. Today." "Discovery won't be today," she shot back, defaulting to the knife she trusted most. Time. "They filed this morning." "The court of public opinion begins immediately," he said. "And you know that court can demolish a case before a judge ever touches it." There it was. The rule she'd taught 100 times, delivered back to her like a verdict. She paced once, phone tucked, fingers drumming the counter. The coffee sat cooling into uselessness. "Words have gravity. That was Communications 101, but gravity turns brutal when someone wants it to crush. The second call was internal. The Chief of Staff's tone had the frosted calm of a stage manager who sees a set piece wobble in Act 1. "We'll tighten the schedule. Fewer impromptus," he said. No freelancing at the podium. Every line vetted until further notice. Every line vetted. She heard the sentence and understood the subtext. The leash was already on the hook. The job title still belonged to her. The job power did not. That sting lasted half a heartbeat before the survival instinct kicked back in. Rules were tools. She'd use them if she had to. She'd smile at the cameras and drive the script. She'd show steadiness they could sell to donors, to voters, to anyone who needed a sedative. But beneath the pep talk scaffolding, another reality sharpened. Jasmine Crockett was not an internet phenomenon. She was a lawyer, one with a long memory and a patient wrist. And lawyers don't throw $80 million numbers at the wall to see what sticks. They build staircases, step by step, until the target has only two choices: climb or fall. Her notification tray belled again, this time a clip. Crockett on the Capitol steps, flanked by the symmetrical gravitas of suits and binders. No shouting, no swagger, just a voice calibrated to cross-examination. Calm, clipped, lethal. Levit toggled the volume up, then let it drop back down. The sound wasn't necessary. She could read the rhythm from the closed caption subtitles, statements. Podium, pattern, damage it, accountability. It was the legal version of a surgical check. Caroline Levitt's story was not supposed to end like this. Just months earlier, she had been the political wunderkind, the embodiment of everything the conservative movement wanted to showcase. Youth, aggression, and a flair for spectacle. At 27, she had become the youngest White House press secretary in American history, a job that traditionally belonged to older, grayer operatives who had earned their scars in campaigns and comms wars. Levit skipped the line. She didn't just enter the arena. She strutted onto center stage and made it clear she believed she owned the script. Her resume read like a political fairy tale designed for cable news segments. Born in New Hampshire to a Catholic working-class family, she had all the optics of the American dream narrative conservatives loved to sell. Her climb from college intern to campaign staffer to one of the most powerful podiums in the world made her appear unstoppable. Add in the media-ready details, her blonde hair always camera-perfect, her sharp blue suit signaling both youth and authority, and her taste for Twitter brawls, and she became the ideal spokesperson for Trump's new era conservative machine. She rose fast, and she fought faster. Her skill was not policy depth, but performance. She could dismantle hostile questions with razor-sharp one-liners, turn a press briefing into a viral moment, and weaponize social media in a way older politicians couldn't keep up with. The Dairo incident, where she obliterated a Hollywood star on live television, wasn't just a debate. It was a coronation. Overnight, conservative media declared her Trump's golden girl, a Gen Z fighter who could handle Hollywood elites, hostile journalists, and political opponents with equal force. But Levit's greatest asset, the swagger, the fearlessness, the willingness to punch, was also her greatest flaw. Victory made her arrogant. She began to believe she could say anything from the podium without consequences. To her, words weren't legal risks or liabilities. They were weapons to be wielded. And when everyone around her cheered those weapons, she convinced herself she was untouchable. On the other side of this story was Jasmine Crockett, a woman built from a different mold. At 43, Crockett was not a viral phenomenon. She was a veteran fighter. A congresswoman from Texas with deep roots in civil rights law, she had made her career representing the vulnerable against powerful corporations and entrenched institutions. Where Levit thrived on confrontation for the cameras, Crockett thrived in courtrooms, where proof, precision, and patience meant everything. Before she entered politics, Crockett had been a civil rights attorney who didn't just talk about justice. She delivered million-dollar settlements for clients who had been silenced and ignored. With a law degree from the University of Houston and a reputation for never backing down, she built her career on the hard, unglamorous grind of depositions, motions, and cross-examinations. In that arena, loud words meant nothing if you didn't have the receipts. And Crockett always had the receipts. Her identity made her fight even sharper. As one of the few black women in Congress, She had endured endless attacks from conservative commentators who dismissed her as an angry activist. They underestimated her discipline, her strategic mind, and her ability to weaponize the law itself. For Crockett, politics wasn't just about winning debates on TV, it was about accountability. And she understood something Levit didn't. Words carry weight. From a private citizen, they might sting. From the White House podium, they could destroy reputations, influence policy, and cross into illegality. So when Levit dismissed her as an angry activist playing the victim card, it wasn't just an insult. To Crockett, it was actionable. When Levit leaned into the microphone and sneered that her civil rights work was nothing more than ambulance chasing for money, Crockett didn't just hear rhetoric. She heard defamation. She heard malice. She heard an opportunity to turn arrogance into accountability. That's what made this clash so explosive. On one side stood Levit, the face of a social media-savvy conservative movement that believed speed and volume equaled power. On the other stood Crockett, a battle-tested attorney who understood that in the courtroom, speed meant nothing without evidence. Levit represented the politics of spectacle, where winning the viral moment was the only goal. Crockett represented the politics of consequence, where every statement could be dissected, documented, and punished. And the stakes? They were monumental. For Caroline Levit, this lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was about survival. An $80 million judgment would bankrupt her personally and professionally. It would make her unemployable in politics, a radioactive figure no campaign or media outlet could touch. Her entire future, the career she thought was destined for decades of stardom, was hanging by a thread. For Jasmine Crockett, the lawsuit wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about sending a message that no one, not even the youngest, most celebrated press secretary in history, was above the law. That abuse of power from the podium would have consequences. That the politics of personal destruction had a legal price tag. And she had the training, the discipline, and the evidence to make sure that price was paid in full. This was not just a clash of two women. It was a clash of two worlds. The brash new conservatism that thrived on virality versus the steady hand of institutional accountability. The culture of cable news combat versus the slow grind of legal warfare. The self-proclaimed untouchable versus the lawyer who knew exactly how to touch her where it hurt the most. By the time the opening shots were fired, one thing was already clear. Caroline Levit had underestimated her opponent. And underestimating Jasmine Crockett would prove to be the biggest mistake of her career. The real drama was just beginning. The day it all began was supposed to be routine. A Tuesday, mid-afternoon, the kind of slot that rarely produced fireworks. Caroline Levit walked into the James S. Brady briefing room with her trademark confidence. Chin lifted, binder tucked, smile sharp enough to draw blood. She'd been on a streak, handling reporters like sparring partners in a ring she thought she owned. Every exchange felt like a chance to prove she was smarter, tougher, and quicker than the so-called veterans in the press corps. She took her place behind the podium, adjusted the mic, and let her gaze sweep across the room. The cameras whirred. Pens hovered above notepads. For her, this wasn't just a job, it was a performance. She wasn't here to answer questions. She was here to dominate them. The session moved predictably at first. A handful of questions about trade, a few about foreign policy. Nothing she couldn't deflect with prepared lines polished by staff. But then Sarah Chen of the Washington Post raised her hand. Chen had a reputation, relentless, sharp, never satisfied with surface-level answers. She stood, voice even, and delivered the question that would become a hinge point in modern political communication. Miss Levit, can you comment on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's voting rights legislation and why the administration opposes it? Simple. Standard. The kind of inquiry any seasoned press secretary would parry with a bland statement about differences in policy or ongoing discussions. A stock phrase, a pivot, move on. That was the safe play. But Levit wasn't interested in safe. She was interested in viral, her lips curved into a smirk. The room leaned in, and then she dropped the first bomb. Congresswoman Crockett claims to care about voting rights, she began, her tone dripping with disdain. But she's really just another angry activist who got elected by playing the victim card. The air shifted instantly. Reporters stiffened in their chairs. Even the ones used to fiery rhetoric paused, pens frozen mid-stroke. Levit, misreading the silence as approval, pressed harder. Her so-called civil rights work, she continued, voice rising with confidence. It was nothing more than ambulance chasing for money. Gasps whispered through the room. The insult wasn't just sharp, it was personal. Levit wasn't debating legislation anymore. She was attacking Crockett's career, her integrity, her entire identity as a civil rights attorney. Still, she didn't stop. She leaned closer to the microphone, eyes flashing with the arrogance of someone who believed the crowd belonged to her. Let's be honest about what we're dealing with here. This is someone who built her entire career on grievance politics and racial division. She talks about civil rights, but what has she actually accomplished besides filing lawsuits and collecting checks? The words hung heavy in the air, broadcast live to millions of Americans. And then she crossed the final line, the one that turned a reckless outburst into legal ammunition. She shifted from policy to the personal, making pointed remarks about Crockett's appearance, background, and even her qualifications to serve in Congress. The insults weren't just dismissive. They were designed to humiliate. For a second, silence reigned. Not the silence of awe, but the silence of disbelief. Even the most hardened correspondents, veterans of Washington's nastiest political brawls, looked stunned. They weren't scribbling notes. They were staring, wide-eyed, as if they knew they had just witnessed something historic and catastrophic. The clip hit Twitter before Levit even stepped away from the podium. 30 seconds of venom packaged into a viral missile. Within minutes, hashtags exploded. Levit Unleashed trended first, celebrated by loyalists who loved the blunt attack. But then the narrative shifted. Journalists, civil rights groups, and legal experts began dissecting the footage frame by frame. This wasn't straight talk. This was character assassination, delivered from the most official microphone in America. Crockett herself said nothing that day. She didn't need to. She sat quietly, watching the storm build, while allies clipped every soundbite, saved every transcript, and documented the attack with surgical precision. Where Levit saw a victorious knockout punch, Crockett saw evidence. Where Levit thought she was humiliating a rival, Crockett was building a case. The danger was 48 hours later, the storm arrived with hurricane force. The filing hit the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., and by sunrise, every major outlet was running the same headline. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sues White House Press Secretary Caroline Levit for $80 million over defamation and civil rights violations. It wasn't just a legal action, it was a declaration of war. The morning the lawsuit became public, Crockett stood on the steps of the Capitol flanked by a team of attorneys who looked like they had been pulled straight out of a courtroom drama. No yelling, no theatrics, just binders, confidence, and the slow, deliberate cadence of a woman who knew she had the upper hand. Miss Levit thinks this is a publicity stunt, Crockett began, her voice calm but edged with steel. Let me be crystal clear. This lawsuit contains 47 separate instances of defamatory statements made from the White House podium. We have documentation, transcripts, and evidence of a pattern of targeted harassment designed to destroy my character and my ability to serve the people of Texas. She held up a thick stack of papers, the complaint itself, and the cameras zoomed in like vultures, circling fresh meat. This is not about hurt feelings, she continued. This is about abuse of power, civil rights violations, and a coordinated effort to spread lies from the most powerful podium in the country. Words have consequences, and today begins the process of holding Miss Levit accountable. The effect was immediate. Reporters swarmed, social media erupted, and the narrative flipped overnight. What Levit had dismissed as grandstanding was suddenly airtight, precise, and lethal. Crockett wasn't just angry, she was surgical. And the contrast was devastating. Legal analysts flooded cable news within hours. CNN's Jeffrey Toobin didn't mince words. When you are a government official making personal attacks from an official podium, you lose protections that ordinary citizens enjoy. Crockett knows exactly what she's doing. This is not frivolous, it's dangerous for Levit. On MSNBC, a panel of attorneys dissected the lawsuit line by line. They pointed out how the complaint didn't just cite Levit's words, but placed them in the context of malicious intent, a critical factor in defamation law. On Fox News, hosts tried to tread carefully. But even there, the tone had shifted from celebration to concern. Mark Garagos, a well-known defense attorney, put it bluntly on Twitter. Crockett has built a strong case here. 47 separate defamatory statements? That's a pattern. That's systematic. This isn't a bluff, it's a legal ambush. For Levit, the shock came not from the lawsuit itself, her team had known something was coming, but from the speed and precision with which Crockett executed the rollout. The lawsuit wasn't filed quietly. It was filed with cameras, hashtags, and primetime coverage. Crockett didn't just sue. She prosecuted her case in the court of public opinion from the very first moment. Inside the White House, panic began to spread. Senior aides were furious, not just because of the lawsuit, but because of what it represented: liability. If a sitting press secretary could be sued for her words at the podium, could the administration itself be dragged into court? Would taxpayer money be used to defend her? Could Crockett subpoena internal communications, emails, or drafts of speeches? The questions were as terrifying as the lawsuit itself. Trump, according to insiders, was livid. The man who had once praised Levit as the future of our movement now reportedly told staff that she had better fix this mess or face consequences. For a president who valued loyalty above all else, Levit's legal liability threatened to eclipse her usefulness as a political weapon, but Caroline Levitt's response only made things worse. Standing at the same podium that had landed her in trouble, she brushed off the lawsuit with a smirk. "This is nothing more than a publicity stunt from an attention-seeking politician," she declared, her voice shaking slightly but still trying to project defiance. "I'm not worried. Frivolous lawsuits happen in politics all the time. This one will go nowhere." The words echoed across the briefing room and spilled instantly onto Twitter. Within minutes, Crockett's lawyers released a statement that hit like a sledgehammer. "Miss Levit's dismissive comments will be added to our lawsuit as further evidence of malicious intent and continuing defamation. We thank her for providing us with additional proof of her reckless behavior," legal experts groaned on live television. One former prosecutor, exasperated, told MSNBC, "She just handed Crockett millions more in damages." This is legal malpractice in real time. The backlash intensified. While Levit's most loyal defenders tried to rally behind her, cracks were already beginning to show in conservative circles. Influential voices like Charlie Kirk and Megyn Kelly stopped short of defending her directly, instead posting vague calls for professionalism in political communication. The subtext was clear. She was on her own. Twitter feeds that once flooded with clips of her fiery comebacks now filled with legal analysis threads, memes comparing her downfall to her earlier rise, and hashtags like Crockett vs. Levit trending worldwide. The internet had shifted, and in politics, once the crowd turns, there's no turning it back. For Jasmine Crockett, the lawsuit wasn't just a legal move. It was a masterclass in strategy. She had framed herself not as a victim, but as an enforcer of accountability. and she had set the terms of the battle in a way that Levit couldn't escape. Courtroom rules, evidence, documentation, and consequences. Caroline Levit, meanwhile, still thought she was in a TV debate. She treated every press briefing like a sparring match, every insult like a punchline. She didn't yet realize that this wasn't a soundbite war anymore. This was a legal war, and in that arena, her bravado was worse than useless. It was suicidal. The lawsuit had landed. The battlefield was chosen, and the cost of arrogance was about to skyrocket. Caroline Levit's first mistake had been her words. Her second mistake was thinking she could outtalk the law. By the time the lawsuit became a media firestorm, most political operatives would have taken the safest path: apologize, soften the rhetoric, and let lawyers do the heavy lifting. But Levit didn't see herself as most operatives. She saw herself as a fighter, someone who thrived on defiance. That instinct, which had made her a conservative icon in the Dairo showdown, now became the rope she was tightening around her own neck. The White House scrambled to control the damage. Senior aides drafted talking points urging restraint. Legal counsel warned her in blunt terms. Every word from the podium could be added to the complaint, increasing her liability. Don't improvise. Don't escalate. Say as little as possible, they told her. But Levit didn't want to be seen as weak. Weakness was death in her world. And so, in front of flashing cameras and rows of reporters, she did exactly what her lawyers begged her not to do. She doubled down. Standing at the podium, she stared into the cameras and declared, "I stand by every word I said about Congresswoman Crockett. If she can't handle criticism, maybe she shouldn't be in politics." This lawsuit is exactly what I'd expect from someone who made her career playing the victim. The room froze. Even friendly reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The silence wasn't admiration. It was the silence of people watching someone dig their own grave on live television. One veteran journalist would later say, "It felt like witnessing a car crash in slow motion. You knew she was destroying herself, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it." Within hours, Crockett's legal team issued a blistering statement. Ms. Levit's comments today will be added to our lawsuit as further evidence of malicious intent and continuing defamation. She has once again provided us with clear proof of her reckless disregard for the truth. Translation: millions more in damages. Legal experts tore into her on cable news. "She just handed Crockett a stronger case," said former federal prosecutor Preet Parara. This is legal malpractice of the highest order. No competent attorney would ever advise a client to keep talking like this. Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe was even harsher. This isn't just arrogance, it's self-destruction in real time. And yet, instead of retreating, Levit took the criticism as fuel. She believed the conservative base wanted a fighter, not an apologizer. She framed her defiance as courage, tweeting later that night, "I will never back down to politically motivated attacks. America deserves leaders who speak the truth, no matter the cost." But her cost was mounting. Behind the scenes, panic turned into anger. White House officials, already furious at the lawsuit, were now livid at her refusal to follow counsel. One aide described the atmosphere as toxic and said senior staff openly discussed whether she had become a liability too great to protect. Trump himself reportedly snapped during a private meeting. "She thinks this is TV, this is court. If she doesn't get it together, she's finished." Meanwhile, Crockett capitalized on Levit's arrogance with chilling precision. At her second press conference, she looked directly into the cameras and delivered a message that resonated far beyond Washington. "Miss Levit wants to frame this as politics," she said evenly. "But this is about accountability. This is about showing that no official, no matter how young, no matter how popular, is above the law. If she wants to double down on her lies, then she is only doubling the damages." Her calm demeanor contrasted brutally with Levit's bluster. Crockett looked like a professional preparing for trial. Levit looked like a political rookie mistaking the courtroom for a cable news set. Social media amplified the divide. Side-by-side clips of Crockett's measured tone and Levit's angry retorts went viral. TikTok creators edited Levit's victim card jab next to Crockett's cool above the law line, racking up millions of views. The meme war that once made Levit famous was now turning against her. Even her allies began to waver. Charlie Kirk, one of her early champions, tweeted carefully, "Legal battles distract from the real issues facing America. Leaders should focus on serving the people, not personal feuds." It wasn't a defense, it was a distancing. Megyn Kelly dedicated an entire podcast episode to the importance of professionalism at the podium, never mentioning Levit by name, but the message was unmistakable. The worst betrayal came from inside her own movement. Senator Ted Cruz, who had once praised her as the future of conservatism, released a statement that landed like a dagger. Public servants must be held to the highest standards of conduct. When those standards aren't met, accountability must follow. For Levit, the shift was devastating. She had built her career on being the conservative golden girl, the fearless spokesperson who could say what others wouldn't. But now, even her champions were walking away, leaving her isolated in the very arena where she once thrived. And yet, she didn't flinch. In private conversations, she insisted she could win this fight just as she had beaten Dairo. "This is no different," she told aides. "They throw punches, I punch back harder. That's how you win." But this wasn't Dairo. This wasn't television. This was federal court. And every punch she threw only tightened the noose. By the end of that week, Caroline Levit wasn't just defending herself from a lawsuit. She was defending herself from abandonment by her party, her allies, and her own White House. The irony was cruel. The very defiance that had made her a star was now the weapon that was destroying her. The lawsuit was no longer just a legal threat. It was becoming a political death sentence. And Caroline Levit was the one writing her own epitaph, one press briefing at a time. The real danger for Caroline Levitt didn't come from Crockett's lawsuit alone. It came from the silence that followed. In Washington, silence is louder than applause, and in the days after she doubled down, Levitt began to notice just how many voices weren't speaking up for her anymore. At first, it was subtle. Charlie Kirk, once her loudest cheerleader, offered vague calls for unity and focusing on issues that matter, but he never mentioned her name. Megyn Kelly dedicated a podcast episode to professionalism in political communication. No direct references, but everyone knew who she meant. Even Tucker Carlson, who had practically anointed her after the Dairo clash, aired a segment on the dangers of unchecked rhetoric in government roles. He didn't show her face, but the shadow was unmistakable. The abandonment was strategic, not emotional. Allies weren't rushing to condemn her. They were doing something worse, distancing themselves. In the hyper-competitive world of conservative media, no one wanted to be tied to a sinking ship. Then came the blow that gutted her core support. Senator Ted Cruz, one of her earliest champions, released a statement that read like a eulogy disguised as accountability. Public servants must be held to the highest standards of conduct. When those standards aren't met, accountability must follow. The words were measured, but the meaning was brutal. He had thrown her overboard. Behind the cameras, the White House was no better. Internal sources leaked that senior staff were furious at the liability she had created. Some had already begun discussing replacements in hushed tones. Trump himself was said to be fuming, describing Levitt as reckless in a private meeting and demanding she fix this fast or get out of the way. The same man who had once called her the future of the movement now saw her as dead weight. Still, Levitt clung to her confidence. She told aides she could outfight Crockett the way she had outmaneuvered Robert Dairo. But that illusion shattered when the first recording leaked. The audio was from a closed-door White House strategy meeting. In it, Levitt could be heard dismissing Crockett in the same cavalier tone she used at the podium. "I don't care what some lawyer from Texas thinks. She can sue me all she wants. I'll destroy her in court just like I destroyed Dairo on TV." When the clip surfaced, it spread faster than any press briefing soundbite ever had. Overnight, Levitt leak was trending worldwide. What was meant as bravado now looked like arrogance bordering on delusion. She wasn't treating an $80 million lawsuit with the gravity it demanded. She was treating it like another TV debate, even conservative. Commentators who had defended her win against Dairo couldn't save her this time. On Fox News, Sean Hannity looked visibly uncomfortable as he played the audio. "If these comments are accurate," he said, "they reflect a serious lack of judgment." On talk radio, hosts who once praised her fire began asking whether she had the maturity to handle such a high-stakes role. The reaction inside the White House was worse. Staffers whispered that she had gift-wrapped Crockett's closing arguments. Lawyers panicked, knowing that every word on the recording could be admitted as evidence of malicious intent. And donors, those all-important lifelines of political survival, began quietly asking whether they should redirect their support to safer figures. By the next press briefing, Levitt was cornered. Reporters pounced, demanding answers about the leaked audio. One asked bluntly, "Do you really believe you'll destroy Congresswoman Crockett in court?" Her response was telling. "I don't comment on private conversations that may or may not have been recorded illegally." It was weak, defensive, and transparent. Reporters smelled blood. Social media exploded with the clips spliced against her defiant podium speeches. The contrast was damning. In public, she claimed strength. In private, she sounded reckless. What made the isolation even more devastating was how quickly it spread beyond Washington. Conservative influencers with millions of followers, people who had once posted daily clips of her fiery exchanges, suddenly stopped mentioning her altogether. Some even posted cryptic statements about choosing battles wisely and focusing on the mission, not distractions. Translation: Caroline Levitt was no longer worth defending. The silence was suffocating. Every day she walked into the briefing room with fewer allies, fewer defenders, fewer lifelines. The reporters knew it. Crockett's team knew it. And most painfully of all, Levitt herself knew it. For a woman who had built her identity on being the loudest voice in the room, The silence was more devastating than any direct attack. She was no longer the conservative movement's golden girl. She was radioactive, and as the silence closed in, her enemies were preparing their next move, a discovery motion that would deliver the knockout punch. Caroline Levitt still believed she could claw her way back. Even as allies abandoned her, even as the lawsuit snowballed, she told herself that all storms eventually passed. A few weeks of bad press, a few viral clips, and the news cycle would find another target. That was her comfort, the American attention span. But then came the discovery motion, and with it, the revelation that obliterated whatever illusions she had left. On a Monday morning thick with summer humidity, Jasmine Crockett's legal team walked into the federal courthouse, carrying a filing that would shake Washington to its core. It wasn't a flashy press conference or a made-for-TV stunt. It was worse, a 47-page motion for expedited discovery, dry on the surface but dynamite inside. Reporters scrambled to get copies. By noon, the most damning detail had already spread like wildfire. Buried on page 23 was an email written by Caroline Levitt herself, 3 months earlier. Addressed to a conservative blogger known for hit pieces, the message was short, sharp, and lethal. We need to destroy Crockett's credibility before she becomes a bigger problem. I don't care what it takes. Find dirt. Make stuff up if you have to. She's too dangerous to let her keep gaining influence. The words hit Washington like a nuclear blast. This wasn't political banter anymore. This wasn't a fiery podium jab. This was written proof of intent, malicious, premeditated, and undeniable. It turned a lawsuit about defamation into something far darker: conspiracy, abuse of office, and potential criminal violations. 2 hours after the filing, Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the Capitol steps once again, this time holding the court documents like a weapon. The press corps, now ravenous, crowded forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crockett began, her voice steady but fierce, "what you're about to hear is not about politics. It's about corruption. This is not just defamation. It is a coordinated effort by a White House official to fabricate lies about a sitting member of Congress." She flipped to the infamous page and read the email aloud. "Make stuff up if you have to," she paused. "Let it sink in. Those are not my words. Those are the words of the White House press secretary, speaking not for herself, but for this administration. This is the abuse of power our laws were written to stop." The silence after she finished was deafening. Reporters who had covered political scandals for decades admitted later they couldn't remember a moment so gutting. The podium, once Levit's stage, had been weaponized against her. Within minutes, cable networks broke into programming. CNN ran a bold chyron: Levit email scandal, make stuff up. MSNBC aired a split screen, Crockett reading the email on one side, Levit smiling at a past press briefing on the other. Even Fox News, usually a safe harbor, led with the headline, "Levit email raises questions. Social media detonated." Make stuff up trended worldwide. TikTok creators spliced the email text with clips of Levit sneering about ambulance chasing and victim cards. Twitter was merciless. She didn't just sink her own ship. She lit it on fire. Legal experts wasted no time. Joyce Vance, a former prosecutor, declared, "This email is devastating. It proves intent, coordination, and malice. It's the kind of evidence attorneys dream of finding." Harvard's Lawrence Tribe was blunter. "In 50 years of practicing law, I've rarely seen someone gift-wrap their own conviction like this." Inside the White House, chaos reigned. Staffers were seen carrying boxes out of offices as if bracing for subpoenas. The Chief of Staff issued a sterile statement. "The White House is reviewing all aspects of this situation and will respond appropriately." Translation: Levit was on her own. Even conservative media couldn't protect her. Breitbart, a longtime defender of Trump officials, ran the headline, "Levit email scandal when politics goes too far." Sean Hannity, visibly uncomfortable, told viewers, "If these allegations are true, this represents a serious breach of trust." The knives were out, and they were coming from both sides. For Levit, the nightmare was total. She had believed that her charisma and fight could outshine legal precision. But Crockett wasn't playing for sound bites. She was playing for evidence. And evidence doesn't fade with the news cycle. It lives in filings, in exhibits, in the permanent record of the courts. Her attempt at damage control only deepened the wound. At her next briefing, Levit tried to spin the email as taken out of context. She claimed it was general language about opposition research, and not an actual directive to fabricate lies. But when a conservative reporter asked her point blank, "How is make stuff up if you have to take it out of context?" her stammered reply sealed her fate. "I think the American people can read that email and decide for themselves what I meant." She may as well have signed her resignation letter on the spot. By the end of that week, the consensus was absolute. Caroline Levit was finished. Not weakened, not wounded, finished. The email had turned her from rising star to radioactive liability in less than 72 hours, and Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't just surviving, she was ascending. With calm precision, she had transformed from a congresswoman under attack into a symbol of accountability, wielding the law like a sword while her opponent drowned in her own words. The smoking gun had been found, and Caroline Levit had pulled the trigger on herself. By the time the email surfaced, Caroline Levit's fate was already sealed. But the true destruction came not from the lawsuit itself, nor from the headlines, but from her own response to the scandal. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she chose denial over accountability, arrogance over humility. What might have been a survivable wound turned into a career-ending implosion. Her first defense came at the podium, the very stage that had elevated her and then betrayed her. Reporters were waiting like hawks, the leaked email printed in their hands, highlighted in neon yellow. Levit stepped forward, visibly tense but still clinging to her trademark defiance. "That email," she began, voice steady but thinner than usual, "was taken out of context. I was speaking in general terms about political opposition research, not suggesting anyone fabricate lies. It's being twisted for political purposes, and I trust the American people to see through it." It was the wrong answer. A reporter in the front row immediately shot back. "Miss Levit, how exactly is make stuff up if you have to take it out of context?" The room went silent, waiting. Levit paused, eyes flickering toward the cameras. Then she gave the line that would haunt her forever. "I think the American people can read that email and decide for themselves what I meant." The soundbite traveled faster than any briefing room exchange in recent memory. Within hours, it was clipped, captioned, and memed across every platform. TikTok creators mashed it against screenshots of the email itself, turning her words into punchlines. Twitter boiled with ridicule. Even conservative commentators struggled to defend her. The narrative wasn't just that she had lied. It was that she had insulted the intelligence of the entire country. The fallout was immediate. That evening, Crockett's legal team released another statement. Miss Levit's explanation defies common sense. Her own words are clear. She instructed someone to fabricate false information about a member of Congress. That is not opposition research. That is corruption. Fox News, once her staunchest defender, barely mentioned her name. Sean Hannity, who had hosted her breakout Dairo moment, spoke of the scandal with obvious discomfort. "If this email is real, it's indefensible." Simple as that. On Breitbart, the headline was blunt. Levit's last stand? Email fallout deepens. Behind the scenes, the White House was in chaos. Emergency meetings ran late into the night. Staffers whispered about containment and damage control, but everyone knew there was no saving her. The Chief of Staff's office issued a vague statement. "The administration is reviewing the matter and will respond appropriately." In Washington, those words mean only one thing: someone is about to be sacrificed. The silence from Trump was the loudest of all. Just weeks earlier, he had called her the future of the movement. Now not a single tweet, not a single Truth Social post, not even a throwaway comment in an interview. For Caroline Levit, the message was unmistakable. She was on her own. By Friday afternoon, less than a week after the discovery motion dropped, Levit submitted her resignation. The letter, leaked within hours, read like a masterclass in blame shifting. "While I strongly disagree with the characterization of my communications, I believe it is in the best interest of the administration for me to step down so this matter does not distract from the important work of serving the American people. Not a word of apology. Not a hint of accountability. Just defiance wrapped in legal jargon." The resignation hit Washington like an earthquake. Cable news anchors treated it as the inevitable climax of a political tragedy. Pundits dissected her downfall in real time, calling it the fastest implosion of a rising star in modern politics. Social media erupted with schadenfreude. The hashtag Levit Destroyed dominated for days, with viral videos splicing her fiery podium attacks against the footage of her resignation. Her collapse became instant folklore. TikTok creators dramatized her story like a cautionary tale. YouTubers produced hour-long breakdowns titled The Rise and Fall of Caroline Levit. Memes mocked her arrogance, her victim card comments, and most of all, the damning email. The same internet that had once propelled her to stardom now buried her under the weight of her own words. But the humiliation didn't end with her resignation. Crockett's lawsuit pressed forward, stronger than ever. Without the shield of the White House behind her, Levit now faced the lawsuit as a private citizen. Her legal team filed motion after motion to dismiss. but judges rejected each attempt. One ruling was particularly brutal. The defendants claimed that her statements were protected. Political speech is undermined by her own written communications encouraging the fabrication of false information, legal. Experts predicted financial ruin. Even if she settles, one bankruptcy attorney told CNN, she could be looking at tens of millions in damages. That's the kind of judgment that follows you for life. Meanwhile, Crockett soared. The same lawsuit that destroyed Levit's career elevated Crockett into a national figure. Her calm press conferences, her precision with the resignation of Caroline Levit didn't just end a career. It rewrote the playbook of American politics. In less than a month, she had gone from Trump's golden girl to a cautionary tale, a meteoric rise eclipsed by an even faster implosion. What made her fall so devastating wasn't just the scale of the lawsuit, or the $80 million damages that hung over her head. It was the way it reversed the narratives of two very different women, and in doing so, sent a warning shot through Washington's political bloodstream. For Caroline Levit, the consequences were absolute. Her legal fees alone crossed into the millions within 6 months, draining her resources even before a trial date was set. The Washington apartment she once flaunted as a badge of success had to be sold off. She moved back in with her parents in New Hampshire, a 27-year-old former star reduced to hiding from reporters camped outside her family home. Bankruptcy lawyers circled, predicting that even a settlement would leave her financially crippled for life. Worse than the money was the exile. Conservative influencers who once plastered her clips across social media now avoided her name like a curse. News outlets that had fought to book her after the Dairo takedown no longer returned her calls. Even the Republican Party, which had once paraded her as proof of Gen Z's loyalty to the movement, erased her from its messaging. Her story had become toxic, and in Washington, toxicity is terminal. But perhaps the cruelest punishment wasn't external. It was internal. Former colleagues described her as broken, struggling to process how quickly it had all unraveled. She replayed her mistakes over and over, asking how she could have been so blind. Her family endured harassment. Her younger sister was forced to switch schools after classmates circulated viral videos mocking Levit's downfall. For someone who had built her identity on strength, confidence, and unflinching defiance, the psychological collapse was as complete as the political one. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's trajectory bent in the opposite direction. Practically overnight, she went from a mid-level congresswoman to one of the most recognizable figures in the country. Speaking invitations poured in from universities, bar associations, and civil rights organizations. Publishers lined up to offer book deals. Cable networks competed to hire her as a commentator. She had become the embodiment of accountability, a lawyer turned lawmaker who didn't just talk about consequences, she enforced them. Her rise was not just political, it was symbolic. For years, she had been dismissed by critics as an angry activist, a label designed to minimize her achievements and weaponize her identity against her. But in the courtroom of public opinion, Crockett dismantled that narrative. She proved that discipline could defeat arrogance, that preparation could destroy performance, that law could triumph over spectacle. In the process, she became a role model for a new generation of politicians who saw in her not just a fighter, but a strategist. The broader implications of the Levit-Crockett saga rippled far beyond the two women at its center. Political scientists began studying the case as a watershed moment in modern politics. The lessons were clear. In the digital age, careers can be built in a single viral moment and destroyed even faster. What once took years of scandal to unfold now collapses in days under the weight of social media amplification and relentless news cycles. But the saga also underscored something more profound: the power of law as a counterweight to political recklessness. In the era of hot takes and viral clips, it was easy to believe that words were weapons without consequence, that political speech was untouchable. The Crockett lawsuit proved otherwise. Words have consequences, even from the podium of the White House, especially from the podium of the White House. For young political figures, the cautionary tale was unavoidable. Communication courses at universities dissected Levit's downfall as case studies. Never put anything in writing you wouldn't want read in court. Never confuse viral applause for immunity. Never underestimate the quiet, disciplined opponent who knows how to wield the law. Professors summarized it bluntly. Caroline Levitt had confused cable news combat with courtroom reality and lost everything. In Washington, the cultural shift was immediate. Press secretaries and communications directors across both parties adopted new guardrails, tightening scripts and vetting language more rigorously. The days of freelancing at the podium were over. Every word was weighed not just for political impact, but for legal liability. The shadow of Levitt's implosion loomed over every microphone. For Jasmine Crockett, the victory was historic, but bittersweet. In interviews, she insisted she hadn't set out to destroy anyone's career. "I didn't want to end a young woman's future," she said in one televised sit-down. "I just wanted to prove that actions have consequences. That power comes with responsibility." But even as she framed her victory in sober tones, her ascent was undeniable. She had gone from a freshman congresswoman to a national figure, a living symbol of accountability in a political era addicted to arrogance.